everybody, it's Nina. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today I have a technique to share with you that I call glitter paint embellishing. And I'm going to be using Dina Wakley heavy body acrylic paints to fill in the images that you see here from Hero Arts' You Are Loved stamp set. I'm going to show you how you can use the acrylic paint and add glitter embossing powder on top to create a glitter paint effect. So the tools we're going to need today are some watercolor paper, some Dina Wakley acrylic paints. I've got turquoise and lime. I'm also using the Hero Arts You Are Loved stamp set, which is filled with a bunch of really great sentiments. We'll be using the globe that you see here and one of the sentiments. Here's a close-up look at one of the globes and how I created that really cool glittery effect on top of the paint. You can see it's a little bit distressed looking. The glitter doesn't cover the entire piece, and that's kind of the look I was going for. For the glitter, I'm using Hero Arts' Sparkle Embossing Powder, and the reason I chose this is so that way I can heat set it and dry the glitter into the paint. So let's get started on the project. I first started off by stamping the globe onto some watercolor paper, and I ended up creating a set of these. You'll see me stamp 3 of these globes, and I'll end up having a total of 4 cards. I stamped this with Simon Says Stamp black pigment ink, so that's way I can add some clear embossing powder on top and heat set that embossing powder to make the globes have a raised dimensional outline. That raised dimensional outline will help me as I go ahead and start my painting with the acrylic paint. For the paint, like I mentioned earlier, I'm using turquoise and lime, and I'm going to be using a small paintbrush from one of Dina Wakley's paintbrush sets. I'm starting off by filling in the continents on my globe, and I'm using the lime green to fill those in. I'm using this nice fine tip to help me get in the smaller areas of this globe image, and I'm applying the paint down fairly thick, not too thick so that it's really gloppy, but thick enough so that it's not a really thin flat coat. That's so that way I can add the glitter powder on top, and that's going to allow the glitter to have a place to hold on to. If the paint's too thin, the glitter isn't going to hold as well because the paint dries too quickly. It was also warmer the day I worked on this project, so the heat also heated up the paint and dried it a little bit faster than if it was a little bit cooler. But as you can see, as I added the heat on top of the embossing powder and melted it into the paint, it creates this beautiful enamel look, and it has a dimensional appearance to it. It's very sparkly and beautiful. I think it's a really cool technique and really fun to mix these media paints together with the glitter embossing powder and create a really cool effect. I'm filling in the water the same way, and I'm going around all the areas with that turquoise blue. Again, adding a thick enough coat so that way there's something for the embossing powder to hold on to. Now, if you have any areas that go outside the lines, this is where the heat embossed outlines work really well and help you. I can take a damp brush and use the tip of it to brush any of that excess paint back inside the lines. So as you can see here, as I'm just scrubbing the brush along the edge, it's clearing it off of that outline. And that's because the outline is heat embossed, so it's a little bit glossy and the paint's not drying on top of there very quickly. Again, I'll add that embossing powder on top of the water, and I will heat set the powder until the powder has melted into the paint. You'll notice that the paint gets a very shiny enamel look once the embossing powder has melted, and then you know it's dry. So after I've gone ahead and colored in my globes and heat set them, you can see the really beautiful enamel look that we have here. And in spots where the paint had already started to dry, the embossing powder doesn't stick to it as well, and you'll have some areas that don't have a full coat of that embossing powder. And that was the look I was going for. If you want it to be completely smooth and completely covered with glitter, you'll want to go ahead and make sure you add a good thick coating and get the embossing powder on there very quickly. So I colored in all 4 of my globes, and now I'm cutting them out with some fine tip scissors. If you could find a circle die that fits around this globe, you could definitely cut that out with the circle, but I didn't have one on hand, so I'm just going to go ahead and fussy cut it, and it was fairly easy to just cut around that circle. To create a tone-on-tone background behind my globes, I'm taking that same globe stamp set and I'm going ahead and stamping the globes in the background. Now as I stamp this, I'm going to be using the globe that I stamp in the top center area of that card, right in the middle. I'm going to use that as a placement for where my globes are going to be sitting on each of these panels. I'm creating all 4 panels the exact same way. You'll see in a minute where I'm going to be sticking that globe in that center portion of the card. I'm also filling in some of the smaller areas with some heart stamps. There's a bunch of different hearts, both solid and outlines, that I'm using to fill in those little nooks and crannies. I really like that there's different sizes included here, so you can really mix and match and find things that work really well, or you can use them all together like I did here on this card. I'm stamping onto soft navy cardstock, and I'm using some soft navy ink. Both are from Simon Says Stamp, and they coordinate perfectly together so you can create a great tone-on-tone effect. Here's where I'm adding my little globe. I'm adding some double-sided adhesive to the back side, and I'm sticking it right over top of that globe, right in the center top portion of the card. I'll make sure I have that positioned right in the middle, and then I'll press that down good. I'll then take this into my mini MISTI and start stamping my sentiment. Now I attached the globe first on purpose because I wanted to make sure I could get a good idea of how the card was going to look with that sentiment, but I also knew that the foam tape was only one layer thick, so I would still be able to stamp with this and the globe would not get in the way of my stamping. So if you do find that you want to add a sentiment and you've already attached your embellishments down, as long as you have one layer of foam tape, it'll fit inside your MISTI tool. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that sentiment with Simon Says Stamp clear ink, and I've prepped the surface of the paper with my embossing powder tool. I'll add some super fine white embossing powder over top of the paper, and then I'll heat set that with my heat gun. I'll repeat the same process for all 4 cards. Then after I've completed all the cards, I'm going to take my tape runner and add the tape around the outside edges of the panel and adhere them down onto some colored cardstock bases. The colored cardstock I'm using here is Green Apple and Mermaid. Green Apple is from Simon Says Stamp and Mermaid is from Lawn Fawn. And I thought these colors really matched nicely with the globe in the center of the card, so they really brought out the colors really nicely. So I'm attaching one of the other panels to the Mermaid cardstock. And these card bases are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And just as an FYI, I did cut the navy panel with the Wonky Stitches rectangle dies from Simon Says Stamp. That adds a nice stitching detail to the edges. Alright, so now I need to add my final bit of embellishing, and this is going to be creating some embellishment hearts that I'm going to add on top of each of the globes. I want them to have that same glitter appearance, so I'm putting some of that really beautiful magenta color of paint onto a piece of watercolor paper, and I'm going to very carefully spread this out evenly across the paper so I get a nice swatch of pink color, but again, it's a little bit on the thicker side so that way the embossing powder has something to grab onto. I'm going to take that same embossing powder and sprinkle that right over top of the panel. You can see we get a great even coating of that embossing powder on there. As we set this will melt the embossing powder into the paint just like it did for the globe, and we'll have a beautiful swatch of pink here that has a nice glittery appearance. It'll take a minute to dry the paint and get the embossing powder to melt, but just keep applying the heat evenly across the paper and you'll end up having a nice smooth finish. Now here I'm going to bring in my sidekick and start die cutting some hearts from this pink paper. So I'm going to go ahead and take the pink swatch and lay this into the cutting plate. And then I will add my little heart dies from the Holiday Shapes die set from Simon Says Stamp. And I'll run that through the sidekick machine to cut out a series of hearts. Now this does cut out 4 hearts. I'm only going to need 3. And you'll see how I'll place them in a minute here as I take them out of the machine. I did cut these from watercolor paper and it did have to go through the paint, so the die cuts did stick inside the dies. But by just grabbing my little craft pick from Tonic Studios and Tim Holtz, I was able to pop each of those out very easily. So I'm going to attach one of the hearts into the center of the globe along the right hand side, and I'll use some foam tape for that as well. This is going to embellish the globe a little bit and give it a nice little bit of interest, and it matches well with the sentiment. I'm going to use 2 of the smaller hearts and add those coming on the outside edges of the globe, and that helps tie in the pink. It adds a little bit of interest to the overall card design, and it helps tie the whole design together by incorporating the rule of thirds. So you have 3 different elements on here, and they all form a visual triangle. So that's a good design tip. Here's a close-up look at the globe and the really beautiful dimension that you get from adding that embossing powder onto the acrylic paint and the really pretty glittery appearance. This was so much fun to do, and I had a lot of fun pulling them all together. I hope you've enjoyed this as well. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below, or you can head on over to the Simon Says Stamp blog to get more information on this card, including still pictures and products used. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to this channel for more inspiration. If you enjoyed, here are 2 more that you might find interesting. You can subscribe or click on the link on the right hand side and find more tutorials featuring fun card making techniques. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon and have a great day. Bye!